It's bright lights up here. Thank you for joining the afternoon session. By way of introduction, I'm Mauricio Sanchez. I'm an analyst, part of the Lower Group. Traditionally, I cover the enterprise vendor side. So for me, coming to MEF, this is only my second time. It's always eye-opening to be able to expand my horizons, to be able to understand different perspectives, especially when it comes to the service provider community. Now for this afternoon, we've got 3 sessions, so it's much shorter than this morning, and then we move on to the future events or the afternoon events. So for this afternoon, we're gonna kick it off with a panel with my partner who's going to do from Roopa from ISG. She'll come on in just a second. Then we're gonna do a keynote, and then we're gonna wrap up with a second panelist interview. So again, thank you, and hopefully everyone is fueled up after lunch. No one, I'm gonna be checking, is anyone falling asleep? No, very good. All right, Roopa, why don't you come on stage with the distinguished panelists?
Good afternoon, everyone. Like Mauricio was saying, I'm watching you. Nobody fall asleep, okay? I was mad Stan gave me this session right after lunch, but you know, you guys have nowhere else to go, so you have to be here. All right, so I have a distinguished panel today, and they'll do most of the talking. Before that, I'm Roopa Honnachari. I'm with ISG, one of the directors there. Before moving to ISG last year, I spent almost 2 decades doing research at Frost & Sullivan. So I've been part of MEF since 2009, I think. I've been coming to this event every year when it used to be actually called Ethernet Expo and then changed to MEF. So a long association with MEF, and I would like to thank them for having me back here. For today's panel, we have Robert Hutchinson with AT&T, and he's the VP of Product Development. We have Bob Victor from Comcast Business, Senior VP of Product Management. We have Paul Ruelas, Verizon Business, and he's the Executive Director of NaaS Solutions. He's got the fanciest of titles for today's session. And we have Prakash Shukla with Cisco. He's the Director of Product Management for SD-WAN. So, you know, talking about NaaS, I think most of the sessions we've been hearing, you know, in this show, everybody's trying to define what NaaS is, and I don't think we still have a full-fledged definition, and hopefully that's the aim, you know, that's the goal, to kind of have something by the end of this event or, you know, eventually, right? As an analyst who's tracked the telecom industry for a very long time, the earliest definition of NaaS that I remember is clearly the on-demand bandwidth, or the ability to, you know, scale up and down the bandwidth you have. And most of the companies, you know, other than Cisco, of course, you know, they have dabbled into this aspect of providing on-demand bandwidth connectivity. And the MEF footprint, the blueprint we saw had 4 different pillars. You know, it starts with transport or the, you know, on-demand bandwidth connectivity. Then the second pillar is, you know, service assurance, application assurance, and they talk about SD-WAN, which I feel like it should be much more broader, right? I mean, SD-WAN is a component or a derivative of SDN. So SDN, NFV, and SD-WAN technologies. And then we have the SASE piece and the multi-cloud connectivity. So without a doubt, you know, the SDN, NFV, SASE, and you know, are critical pieces of the NaaS definition we are trying to get to as an industry here. So, you know, let's see what the panelists have to say on this. Let's start with hearing from each one of you as to what are some of the trends in your opinion that exist today, which were not prevalent in the past, that's driving the demand for NaaS, right? So Robert, maybe we'll start with you first.
Yeah, I'll share a couple. Good afternoon, everyone. A couple of thoughts. One that's been talked about a lot was just the adoption of hybrid cloud, and I think more and more as customers, enterprises continue to adopt hybrid cloud, it's going to push us more towards needing more network as a service solutions for those customers. The other big driver, I think, for it is the amount of time that we've been investing in our own network infrastructure for software-defined networks. So as that evolution continues, the capability to provide more services within the network continues to grow as well. So I think those are 2 big ones. Maybe a third one that I would offer is the transport itself on the edge of the network. Some of the frustration that we heard earlier from some of our enterprise customers is, you know, really about getting the network to the edge, how long it takes to deploy fiber, those sort of things. But as fixed wireless becomes more prevalent, the capability of using fixed wireless to provide network as a service becomes more meaningful for customers as well. So I think those are a few.
Bob?
Those are good ones. I think sort of stepping back on the question, what are the trends that are driving? And I think really the fundamental trend is you used to have a customer location. You had a business site, and at that site you had employees, you had applications, and things happened at that site. COVID, and even before COVID, you kind of destroyed that site. All of the users kind of went home and now work remotely. Applications have moved from that location into the cloud, multi-cloud. Even the notion of endpoints with sensors and IoT, the notion of a user is different. So I think that's been the fundamental trend away from delivering a site or a set of sites to delivering to endpoints, most of whom are people, but increasingly non-people, to applications which are all cloud-based and more and more likely multi-cloud. So you've kind of disaggregated the company into a series of virtual endpoints.
Well,
I think it's great. I'd add a couple more things. It definitely is, as Bob mentioned, right, the journey from the devices, sites, and users, right, all the way across into the cloud, and not just to the front door of the cloud where a lot of us stop today, but actually into the cloud environment to drop the workload there. But I'd add two more pieces. I'd add definitely that embedded modular security is critical to this. If you can't critically, secure those workloads from the user and from anything that could happen at that site or device into the cloud, that's something that customers aren't going to buy. And the last piece is just a really stellar portal experience. You're talking about a large basket of services that are within the NaaS portfolios. Networks are esoteric. It's hard for customers to see the outcomes and what happens in the analytics there. Tied into that portal experience really brings it home when they're able to see not just the network view, right, or the application view, but combine that with security and analytics through AI and ML with AI ops really will drive that home for the resolution for that customer.
So yeah, in addition to what was mentioned, basically another thing is on the IT teams, the resource challenge is constantly increasing, right? There are a lot of innovation happening, and it is not possible for few team members to learn all those technologies. And then for organization to retain that resource pool is even more challenging, right? So this trend is becoming even more prominent and is going to influence NaaS as well from enterprise point of view, in addition to what panel mentioned here.
great, thank you. So, as we see NaaS evolving, right? I mean, we had, like I said, 10 years ago, NaaS was just providing on-demand bandwidth connectivity. And then SDN, NFV, and SD-WAN came into picture, kind of took the center stage. So we kind of forgot about the NaaS acronym, I feel. And now as we see these technologies making inroads into enterprise networks, we feel like, okay, this can be NaaS, right? Like we have the enabling tools now, not fully transformed, but it's happening, right? So how do you see these technologies, and SD-WAN specifically, right, kind of folding into the NaaS portfolio at your companies? Maybe we can start with Jay this time because we are at you. Cisco takes a different approach to NaaS, right? You have a NaaS offering today. So is it buying hardware components in an as a service model, NaaS? It could be, right? It's one of the flavors of NaaS. So Jay, in general, how do you see SD-WAN and SASE, functionalities folding into NaaS?
Absolutely. So NaaS, as the definition is still getting firmed up compared to earlier definition, today it includes cloud, security, network, application assurance, and a lot more, right? So it's not just few piece of the puzzle. It's a lot bigger today from NaaS definition point of view. Enterprises, whether they are SMB or multinational, they are looking at end-to-end solution. They are not looking at point solution because they want to take advantage of cloudification. And guess what? Network is the only component that is still stuck in the past, not cloudified, right? What I mean by cloudification is basically taking advantage of those cloud terminologies, norms in terms of subscription-based model, moving away from CapEx into more on the OpEx side of it. So that is one part. Second part is MEF is bringing this blueprint wherein it helps glue this entire piece of the puzzle together. So we do see from Cisco point of view or vendors providing solution point of view is it will evolve wherein not only it will be a 1 or 2 or 3 piece product solution integration. It will be much bigger integration with our partners, with our MSPs, and all those solutions will be sold on both sides of it, from the vendor side of it as well as from the provider side of it.
Paul?
Yeah, there's some great points there, and I agree in that, I've launched many SD-WAN solutions, managed solutions over the last 8 years or so. But I still think that the lack of interoperability between the vendors has really hampered the explosion, the growth that we thought was going to be there. That doesn't mean that customers don't need application visibility and control. It's a shift in the market, right? An inflection point of customers saying, well, can I get that embedded into my network itself versus just bolting on in this overlay, underlay stuff. I've never bought into the whole, you have agility with this overlay when the underlay's static. To me, if you don't combine both the controllers together, you're really losing out on the benefits to the customer and the application visibility and control.
Bob?
Those answers were so interesting, I forgot what the question was.
How do you see your SD-WAN solution and SASE functionalities folding into the overall NaaS offer as you go as NaaS offer, basically? When you
I guess Deepika, my colleague at Verizon, said something very interesting, which is, and like Deepika, I've never heard a customer come to us and say, I need NaaS.
Yeah.
And what tends to happen is customers come to us and say, look, I have lots of sites and lots of customers and cloud-based applications. I need a global secure network to stitch that all together. And so I think as customers think about the problems they're trying to solve in their digital transformation, when they think about what their network is and what their challenges are, it's connectivity, it's networking across the connectivity, it's security, it's connecting that to applications on top. And so, we were joking about this before, which is, my colleague Robert, who goes by Rob or Robert or Hutch, sometimes is, you can kind of call it a bunch of different things. But really, as you think about network as a service, a global network, global network management, customers want service providers together with our partners who are software providers and element providers to stitch that together for them to manage the complexity and take that off and take on that function and deliver that as a service. As we talked about, usually with an MRC, but it could be a capital model, it could be an AppEx model.
Yeah.
It might be usage-based if it's kind of a cloud application in a data center, but more generally it's an MRC model at an endpoint.
Yeah, I don't know that I have much more to add. Right? The underlay and the overlay, the concept of them being one on top of the other just has to come together in a way that's more intertwined, right? And the framework that we looked at earlier, I think it had SD-WAN, it had SSE, and then it had Zero Trust, right? And it's all of those things packaged together neatly that we need to be able to do together. And the overlay means working closely with our partners, and the underlay means making sure that the network capability that we provide can work well for the vendors that we work with, the suppliers that we work with, and for our clients.
Yeah, I agree with you, with Bob, what you said. I don't think, even I see clients coming and saying, we want to, roll out a NaaS solution or something.
They don't say, give me NaaS,
Yeah.
They don't say, give me SASE, and
Yeah.
they don't say, give me SD-WAN. We do.
But at least, like the basic definition they have is, okay, I want something which is consumable in an OpEx model, and definitely a flexible bandwidth, flexible network connectivity. And of course, with the SD-WAN, they already have this capability to centrally orchestrate and manage and, apply business policies to it. Now, SASE is a totally different animal, right? It's a third pillar in the MEF blueprint. But I think it's more challenging to kind of combine that in a NaaS offer. Enterprises still seem to make a lot of SASE decisions separately. Is that what you're seeing? So how do we change that conversation and say, think about this together?
That's me. Sorry.
Oh, whoever wants to go first.
No, I think it's great. So first to me, the security and network are two sides of the same coin. Right? It always has been. Go back to the managed firewalls from years. We've had it in the networking side. But what I'm seeing is, and I'd like to get your guys' take maybe too, is I'm seeing a shift in the buyer. I'm talking to a lot more CISOs than I am the typical telecom managers. And they're coming at it from a different lens. They're focused on security first, the SASE solutions first, Zero Trust. In fact, you're right, SASE doesn't hunt much, but Zero Trust is what's really bubbling up. And when I start having that talk about Zero Trust leads into SASE and CASB and those pieces, next thing I know, the customer's actually talking about NaaS. They just don't know that they're talking about NaaS. So I find that very interesting. Then we go through a NaaS conversation, and they're like, yes, I want this, I want this, I want this, and I want to see it all together. So I think that shift is definitely gaining more traction, and I want to see where the industry goes in the next 6 to 9 months.
I want to add here is that to your point, right, part of the same coin. So connect and protect, they go hand in hand. You cannot think of not having security in today's world and providing some type of connectivity. It's not possible, right? So it's very important for SASE, which includes both SD-WAN and SSE, right? And that's the reason why it is part of a single solution or a single. Now, what happens is what work MEF is doing is in terms of standardizing across these various components will help customer get various choice. Like I want this particular component from SD-WAN point of view, but I want to have capability of XYZ vendor for my certain security aspect and some other vendor from some other aspect. So those choices are something that will be available with these type of framework.
Bob, Robert, anything to add to that?
No.
Yeah, nothing to add.
Okay. So, I mean, it's very clear, right? The underlying platforms and the infrastructures, SDN, NFV, SD-WAN, they all need to come together and function together because all this, orchestration we're talking about, the virtualization, the cross connects, that need to happen seamlessly. So these platforms need to be, in place for that to happen. And they are in place to an extent, but like, I don't know who said on one of the previous panels, everybody's just focusing on their own platforms or their own networks, and we need the interconnectedness, right, for the NaaS to get more broader and scale. And I think that's why, this industry, MEF is important. The kind of work they are doing is important, right? Let's see. So when we talk about this, right, I mean, it seems very simplistic theoretically, all the things that you could do. You could bring all these 4 pillars together, so on and such. And I think each one of you know it's not so easy, right? So I guess the question is, in terms of orchestration and management, how are your operations teams and delivery teams preparing to deliver on this? At least pillar 2, and maybe combine pillar 3, which is SDN, NFV, and SD-WAN, and the SASE pieces. So, Robert, do you want to go first, or Bob?
Take first crack.
Okay, I'll take the first crack.
I'll clean up.
All right, awesome. Maybe I'll start with 2 things, and I'll leave the third, which is the most obvious, to Robert. But I would say the first 2 things I'd look at is visibility. As you think about particularly multi-vendor solutions, our operations teams need to be able to take the data and what's happening in one sphere, consolidate it, centralize it to put tools and analytics around that so that they can really correlate across different individual components of it. So that's really big. And another thing we've talked about is just this idea and issue of data models. So, how are things set up and what's the clarity, and then having, that data model translate not only in the sales and quoting and orchestration, but also just provisioning, to have some kind of standardization so that we can operate efficiently, effectively. If every single vendor is a snowflake that requires custom integration, that just doesn't work. And so to the extent that we bring on new vendors, we're thinking very carefully about how does that integrate and what are the APIs and the touch points with others. And to the extent that we can do that as an industry, I think it really will speed up service adoption, for all of us. It'll help us as service providers, it'll help us as vendors and technology providers. So, those are the maybe 2 more subtle points, but I'll leave the more obvious one to Robert.
You might not have the same problem as, our operations have been working on security and network for a long time. We know how to do that, and creating new capability of network functions, we'll naturally embrace that and be able to do that for our customers. I think what our bigger challenges is, or for us in particular, is really about the legacy of systems that we have in order to make this capability available to our customers, right? In the network itself, and then the BSS and the OSS stack that has to sit on top of it and talk to the network and provide that capability to our customers. So once we get all of that working, I think that's the real heavy lift for this capability. Once you get that working and it's in place, then it exists to the customers, right? We'll have to troubleshoot when things break. We'll have fallout. We have fallout today in our systems that our operations teams have to work through. But the engineers, the security experts that have to do the network today are going to be the same in the future. Right? The interoperability challenges that was referenced earlier when we started doing NFVs and trying to get vendor A with vendor B security and network policy and network management to work together. We'll still have those challenges afterwards, and the same base of engineers, experts in our industry will still help fix them. That's the way I look at it. I really think the system stack is the biggest challenge that we got to navigate.
I think that's actually the right answer. I mean, I was joking about giving him the obvious one, but I missed that one. I think that was a good one.
That was good. Well,
So is there a lot of reskilling, upskilling happening, because that's one of the challenges for the providers, right? To have the right personnel to actually deliver on all these things. And
Yeah, I
telecom
mean, just a
industry
few
has
years
changed
ago,
so
right?
much.
If you look at us, we all sold circuits. We were circuit slingers, and sometimes we sold a box, right? Firewall, router, something. In the last 10, 15 years, the pace of change has been radical, right? We've got multi-path, multi-device, application aware, and the site centricity of the user's applications and devices that live there. Even our order systems all changed. All of us had to go through and redo. We were at a circuit level. Now we're at a site level and a customer level. That's a lot of change, and not just the systems, but the personnel behind that. Your ops people had to change, your delivery folks had to change how they deliver circuits, because if not, we've got stranded circuits, right?
Yeah.
We'll install a primary circuit, but the customer says, I'm not paying for that site until the secondary and the box is up. So that, I think, was really interesting, in how all of us on the operational side had to make a big change in the industry and then tie that back to the portals so that we get that visibility and control.
Also from vendor side of it, right, as Bob mentioned, that a lot of information is needed, analytics information is needed, right? But from vendor point of view, we need to think, okay, do we share raw data, or should we share process data? To what level is also equally important, because just sending all of it may not be very useful and consumable from the MSP point of view, right? Additionally, vendors need to make sure that it's not like tight APIs, it should be loosely coupled, ruggedized, resilient APIs, SDKs to be provided, right? It's not only about monitoring, it should provide a lot of necessary information, reporting. All of those capabilities should be built in as a base foundation of the product, right? Plus automation, it's not only provisioning, it's complete lifecycle management of it. Multi-tenancy should be part of built-in, because then it helps providers scale much better, right? So there are a lot of such aspects at a vendor level need to be looked at to make sure that NaaS solution is a complete solution and easier to consume by MSPs to provide it to their customers.
Great.
Just one other comment real quick. And you said it first, you said visibility at first, but you triggered me on this, Paul, when in your comment. The complexity of the network is getting so much greater with what we're doing. It's not NaaS creating the complexity of the network. It's back to the hybrid cloud situation earlier. It's not from an endpoint to a data center somewhere. Yeah. It's, in the first question, you described how it's going everywhere, right? The endpoint's a device now, and visibility into all of that. So you got this, the BSS OSS stack that you're trying to manage and upgrade, but now you need visibility everywhere into multi-cloud environments, down to, access points to devices. That gets much more difficult to troubleshoot. So the network skill, the security skill still sits there and embedded, but getting the visibility right for the engineers to find issues is going to be, I think, a challenge we'll have to navigate.
And that's why you were going to say, and that's why you need Comcast Business?
No, not quite.
Sorry.
Where I don't have fiber. Right.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with everything that you have summarized, and that's why the kind of work MEF is doing, and everybody's participation, right? Like all of you sitting together, even talking about it, joking about it, that makes a difference to the kind of integration we need. These are the technical aspects, but what about the enterprises, right? I mean, we talk about different hurdles, right? Why has NaaS not gained traction? We've been talking about it for the past 10 years. Honestly speaking, everybody has their own definition, right? NaaS terminology has been dropped around quite a bit. So what do you think are the hurdles, right? From the enterprise perspective or from the provider perspective that has stopped it from kind of gaining the traction it should be. I have my thoughts, but I'll hold off till I hear from the panel. So who wants to go first? Jay, you want to go first?
Sure, I can go first. So when it comes to enterprise choice of security, if NaaS, the promise that it is mentioning is delivered correctly, enterprise need not worry about, hey, I want this security or that security. It's part of the package of NaaS, right? Of course, there will be bigger enterprise for certain applications, certain requirement. They may have certain criteria and a requirement that is not fulfilled by a general package. But apart from that, for most of the use cases, NaaS should be able to provide right level of security with right packaging upfront. So it is not enterprise who are choosing what security solution. They are simply choosing, okay, I want this particular NaaS package to consume, right? So that's my thought.
And that's how you want them to think about it?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, okay. Paul?
I think there's a couple, right? We definitely have to get more, coalesce over what is NaaS, kind of that first question piece. And I think it's a testament of the folks like the MEF and the folks here, right? We had a talk at lunch a little bit about, think of how much cost it is to have all of us here, right? But it's important to our bosses, right? And the people that we report through and our customers to come together and start talking about these challenges and to coalesce the industry. I think virtualization of the network is change. That helps the adoption as well. And then even just talking to like-minded folks of how we're gonna get together. We all have our audience of a customer base we're gonna attack. And I think there's been a reticence within the industry of, well, I can't share APIs right, with Bob or Robert. I can't do this stuff because I'm gonna lose my uniqueness. To me, the service wrapper, the portal, the experience, the sales experience, is what really drives it home to the customer. And there's space enough in this industry for all of us to work together on the backside so that we can then front load it with the customer base and then go to market at the way we want to and get that customer. I think that's where we're gonna get more traction.
Yeah, I guess those answers, I agree with those. And maybe it's an interesting question, stepping back. On the one hand, you'd say, look, if you think about this conversation today, and where we were 10 years ago and what corporate networks looked like 10 years ago and the types of problems we were trying to solve 10 years ago, you might say, well, actually things have moved pretty quickly. We had kind of very different networks and MPLS 10 years ago, and now everyone's talking about SD-WAN, everyone's talking about multi-cloud, everyone's talking about cloud access security brokers and zero trust and how you manage these things. So to some extent it is moving quickly. I think at an enterprise level, as a customer, it used to be the CIO or there's a person that ran network and the network guy got the connectivity and the CIO ran applications. And today, I think for a large enterprise, it's incredibly complex, especially when you add in compliance and security for people. So you've got to deal with the CISO, you deal with the IT manager, you deal with the application owners. So I think again, we come back to what we've talked about, the extent that we can demystify it, make it a bit more standardize on data models, make these pieces interoperable, because every single enterprise is moving from some kind of legacy, which is different from every other enterprise, into this new world and doesn't want to do a massive rip and replace of everything. I think there's a lot of just complexity from moving from where they are to where they are, where they're going, but I wouldn't underestimate how fast actually, in fact, despite all these challenges, we're already moving.
I'll just comment to the panel that we had earlier today, the enterprise customers that were talking, right? And for all of us as a whole, we, two of the panelists that were up there, two of the advisors that were there made mention of their biggest challenge wasn't so much to change bandwidth. Yeah, they might need to do that, right? And it's better to do that on demand. But if you remember, their biggest challenge was, I got this location that's opening at this spot and it takes 60 days to get whatever facility there. So I use it as the example to say, listen to our customers on what they're saying, right? They want security. We talked a lot about that. They want reliability in terms of the network that they're purchasing. Let's make sure that we're solving the right problems for them. Then the adoption will come on it afterwards, right? If we as engineers and as an industry aren't listening, then we're probably going to miss the mark and look back and say, we didn't hit exactly what we need to do. From the carrier perspective, I think this has just been a journey as we've been software defining our network, creating APIs to be able to talk to the network. It takes the time and years of massive capital investment in order to do that. So the time's coming, right, where you're going to be able to take advantage of that. And I think we're at the forefront of that now.
Okay.
Just to add one piece to Robert too on the access piece. I mean, that's something we definitely have to work on, right? Whether it's public, private, wireline, wireless, bring your own access, it shouldn't matter, right? How do you get to the platform? Get to our platform.
Yeah.
And that's when we have to make sure that Debica mentioned that ubiquitous access should be a major component of the theme of NaaS.
Yeah. My thoughts are, from what I have seen, actual enterprises, when they come to ISG and ask for, the strategy they need to follow, and, NaaS or SASE or whatever, they're usually starting with the pricing, actually. They want to move from a CapEx model to an OpEx model, and that's their definition of NaaS. Maybe because of, the offerings that's from Cisco and some of the service providers, what they have branded as NaaS. And clearly, bandwidth on demand is not the first thing on their minds. We know that, right? Not many organizations need that kind of scalability for hours or for weeks. So they're usually starting with the point of how do I optimize my IT or network cost, and how do I move this from CapEx to OpEx, and then how do I not get locked in to a vendor or a provider, right? Like they got NaaS from Comcast, right? Tried it for a year, don't like it. I hope not. And then they say, I want to go to Verizon or somebody, right?
No,
so,
or if they're within Comcast and want to move from, a Viptela solution to a Meraki solution.
Yeah. So here I'm not really thinking about the OEM, but the provider, right? So they want that flexibility. So when they are thinking of flexibility in terms of how they price for it, how they take off the hardware from their books, right? And how they can, have the option to choose with whom they want to work with, right? Like if I don't like, whichever cable company, I won't name the names, I don't want them, then I can go to company B today, right? So can they do the same thing on the enterprise side? That's how they are thinking. That's what I'm seeing, and maybe the conversation will change since we don't have a set definition of NaaS, but at least we have 4 pillars now, which is a good blueprint. I keep saying footprint, I don't know why, blueprint, right? So we could say these are flavors of NaaS, like, Cisco could continue doing the NaaS offer they have, which is buying hardware as a service, right? They're buying the gear. But like Robert, like you and I were discussing, let's say they want to buy SASE from Cisco and they want the network as a service, it could be over AT&T's network. So you are the partner and vice versa, right? So I think those are my thoughts, but do you have any closing thoughts? We still have 5 to 6 minutes. Anybody wants to add anything or close out?
Let me add maybe a little bit. I think because we've talked a lot, and you've mentioned this issue of I want to move from a CapEx model to an OpEx model, and I think that is generally true. But what's lost is both the client and the providers think in terms of IRR.
Yeah.
And so, what they want is kind of a more long-term cost-effective model. And if I'm buying CapEx, and I've got a model that says I'm going to keep this CapEx there for 10 years, geez, I'd love to buy that in OpEx where a vendor could replace that, CapEx once a year or every other year. So I think these conversations, and when you think about what is the service and what are the elements of the service, if Wi-Fi standards change, or if I have twice the users or half the users, how do I switch out equipment? That's a complicated procurement discussion to have.
That's the contracting language,
Well, it's the contracting language, also the usage language. If a CIO is thinking about, over the next X number of years, what am I trying to solve for? If the CIO feels, look, I only have a 2-year horizon, I can just sort of screw the last 10 years and lock into whatever. But really, you're typically dealing in the enterprise space with a sophisticated buyer and a sophisticated seller that's working through all these things. And I think to some extent, the idea that you can just turn up and turn down knobs, and for 25 cents more, you can get 3 more, megabits of service, it doesn't really work like that yet, given the constraints and the underlying economics of what we're trying to provide. So I think it's a journey of more automation and of simplifying things and moving contracts quicker. But I wouldn't, we're not at a point where we're totally software and we can deliver software to a blank appliance at the endpoint and just switch out the services that way without disrupting the operations of the enterprise.
Yeah. Like I said, they're not really thinking about buying bandwidth for a few hours, paying just for hourly. When they say OpEx, they are saying, okay, and they understand that it's actually more expensive to buy it in an OpEx model. I think everybody here would agree it's not cheaper than the CapEx model.
It shouldn't make a difference, actually.
Yeah. No, right now it is more expensive than the CapEx model.
Why?
But they're buying it in a subscription model. Buying it as a service. Let's say NaaS, I mean, Verizon has some of these deals, right? You're in a retail customer paying something per store, right? So you decide what goes in there and how you're going to connect it, and per store, this is the monthly recurring fee. So that's the kind of freedom and flexibility, you know, some of the customers are looking at.
Yeah, I think I would disagree with that, actually. I would say, look, for a total, from a customer's perspective, it ought to be less expensive to buy it from an OpEx model, because what, you know, you can sort of say, I think it's a wash. If you think about a wireless access point, whether they buy that, you know, in one-time CapEx or you amortize the price of that over 3 years, shouldn't make a difference. But really what we're doing is we're providing a service at a lower cost than they can provide themselves. So if something goes down, we'll replace it. And if they think about the staff they need to have to service that model, you know, in a DIY model, we and, you know, our partners and other service providers can do that at massively more scale with a lot more efficiency and automation than our clients can. So I do think network as a service has to be less expensive for end customers, or else they shouldn't be interested in it.
That's really good to hear. And I think that will be in the long run, depending on how long, you know, you spread it out over. But at least now in the initial phases, it's not so. So that's really good to hear from you, Bob, and I'll hold you to that.
I'm going to come back to you in our negotiations with our customers. I'm going to say, no, it is going to be more expensive than if you do it yourself, and we'll bring in Roopa to help explain why.
There's even though some challenges though, even in the OpEx, and I don't mean just like the device on site. You've always had those OpEx models and CapEx models. But what I find interesting is, you know, in RFPs and checkboxes, because of the SaaS providers, I get asked, well, will you get me your network services consumable by a buy the drink type service? So we did all these plan changes, all this stuff that be able to build those plans. Then we go back to the same customers, and the buyers are initially okay, and then we get to their financial person, right? And they go, well, wait a minute, but what if we go over here? And we say, well, you're making money, right? You're selling your services, you're making money. Well, no, I want a fixed price. So all my services have both a fixed price and a monthly service price, depending upon there. And then they want the monthly by the drink with a cap as well, right? I think so. It's just interesting that you see all these requests, but then you're trying to do the old Henry Ford. You know, they're asking for a faster horse. You're trying to build them a car. So it's interesting that you build things that you think they're asking for, but in the end, they ask something totally different on the buying side.
Right, but you know what they say? They say, this conversation's easy. Wait until you get to my lawyers.
We've worked on that too, right? The SLAs. That's one thing we didn't talk about, NaaS. NaaS has to have a unified SLA. You cannot provide these umbrella of services from edge to cloud and security without having a single service assurance guarantee across the board. And I see it. We look in the industry, and you'll go through these pages and pages, hundreds of pages of SLAs. It's like, well, that's the MTTR in the box. Well, that's the SLA availability in the circuit. Well, that's the jitter. You can't do that anymore. It's got to be one ubiquitous SLA across the board.
Yeah. Jay, you want to add anything? Because I know Cisco
No,
has
I totally agree, and there's a lot to be done. As we can see from the panel discussion, there's a lot to be done, and devil lies in detail, especially on the operation side of it, right? I, as a customer, something went wrong, I got another replacement. Now, is the replacement new, used, refurbished? What is it? What is the expectation? So there are a lot of such things that need to be solved before we can say, hey, yes, we got it right.
Yeah.
It's a long journey.
Yeah, you know, that example I quoted about, you know, paying per store, right? So how often does the refreshes happen? You know, are they getting the latest components that needs to be there to run that? So, I mean, the reason I asked that question, I kind of teased out on pricing and contracting is because, you know, a lot of discussion has happened about the technicalities of it, right? The technical architecture of what NaaS should look like. So I just want everybody to start thinking about the next step. As you talk to the customer, you know, how they are thinking, how will you price it, how will you contract it, right? When you're going to sell something, you know, usually what we've seen is 3-year contracts, you know, most is 3, you know, 1 year or 3-year contracts. So just to help everybody start thinking about the next steps, if you're going to sell this, so think about the next steps, you know, how will you address these questions as you deal with procurement, with sourcing, and whoever signs off the check finally. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Hopefully, this was helpful.